Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is amazing, creative, unique, and everything I wanted from this story but didn't even know I wanted until now. It's not only a technical marvel in animation and music, it also stands as an example on how one small change to the source material can change everything. It's not just an adaptation, it's a new experience that allowed for more exploration, new concepts, and character growth never seen before in this universe. After watching it, many fans are now left asking themselves whether or not this anime lives up to the legacy set before it, and I want to talk about it. I have so much love for this anime, and there's a lot of things I want to cover, so let's go through it together. Let's talk about the amazing, beautiful mess that is Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Oh, and just to show off how much of a fanboy I am, I have the Scott Pilgrim vs. the World video game soundtrack on vinyl. This thing is so sick. All of the music is amazing. Most of it made by a band we're going to be talking about in just a little bit. But yeah, I have this. And here is the Scott Pilgrim box set. Right here, all 6 volumes. Have I proven I'm a fanboy yet? As I said before, the anime released on November 17th of 2023 on Netflix. The animation was handled by one of my favorite animation studios to date, Science Saru. I love this studio so much. They are up there for me with Studio Trigger and Studio Bones. The creators of Keep Your Hands Off Izuken, Japan Sinks, Devilman Crybaby, and they even worked on an animation for Star Wars Visions. This studio breathed so much new life in the Scott Pilgrim universe. Their mastery of fluid motion, colorful and creative set pieces, and action-packed fight scenes made this series feel exactly like what I would have imagined a Scott Pilgrim anime to look like while I was reading the comic. To how the characters look, how they move, how they speak, how they emote. Science Saru really captured the essence of what Scott Pilgrim was, and that was not by accident. In interviews, co-producer BenDavid Grabinski spoke to how excited Science Saru was to work on this project. They had so much respect for the original creator, Bryan Lee O'Malley, referencing so much of his work, even things that weren't even officially published. Animation director Abel Gongora also spoke about how much prep work went into creating the world itself in the anime, and spending hours and hours looking into homes and neighborhoods of Toronto to get the proper perspective needed to create the world of Scott Pilgrim for the anime. The purpose of getting Science Saru to work on this project was not for them to just do what was expected of them from the comic, but to elevate what was already there on the pages and in the movie and in the video game. They were there to provide something that just wasn't going to be possible with all of the previous iterations of Scott Pilgrim, and I think they did an amazing job. Along with the great animation, the music goes absolutely insane. Music has always been part of Scott Pilgrim's DNA. I know that even back when they were making the live action movie, bands like Beck and Metric were used as the base for a lot of the music in the movie, and who could forget the amazing performance of Brie Larson with Black Sheep. In the anime, there are so many different tracks, ranging in style and genre, that elevate the sections and episodes that they show up in. Probably my favorite is United States of Whatever during the Lucas Lee episode. Felt very Tony Hawk Pro Skater, but the real stars behind the music in the anime are the exact same people who worked on the music for the video game, Anamataguchi. They really know how to add atmosphere, emotion, and really lean into that old style video game energy. I have always been a big fan of using really expressive music to elevate the material that you're working with. I think it's one of the things that a lot of fans maybe overlook with consuming the media that they enjoy. You can't really ignore it with Scott Pilgrim, and it's one of my favorite aspects of the entire thing. Just as a sidebar, can we talk about the voice acting for a second? For the English dub, all of the actors from the live action movie came back to do their roles for the anime, and they knocked it out of the park. I honestly can't think of any other people who would breathe life into these characters the way that these voice actors do. Scott would not be the same without Michael Cera behind his voice. What's even more fascinating is that the creators didn't even think that these people were going to come back to reprise their roles. But the moment they put out the APB for the new series, they all immediately said that they would come back. It was like 17 miracles working in tandem. With all the amazing animation, the infectious music, and the knockout performances from the actors, the thing that matters the most to me and many other fans is the story. That is the big question mark here. Does it hold up to the legacy of Scott Pilgrim? We're going to be entering spoiler territory here, so if you have not seen the series, I highly recommend you go watch it right now. Pause this video, boot up Netflix, and go watch it for yourself. But for the rest of us, buckle up. So by now, you know about the big dilemma of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. I remember sitting down, getting through a majority of the first episode and thinking, wow, this is exactly as I remember from the comic. They're doing such a great job at adapting this story, and then everything changes. Turns out, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off wasn't just some fancy, catchy name. Homeboy really takes off. At the end of episode 1, Scott Pilgrim dies or disappears. This is not an adaptation of the books, the movie, or anything that has come out before it. This is a alternate reality sequel, and some fans are not happy with the results. Some calling it an unnecessary reimagining, and some calling it downright horrendous. To remove Scott Pilgrim for a majority of the runtime is a ballsy move. Scott's story is why so many people fell in love with this tale in the first place. He's the main character. It's named after him. To write him out of the story from the very first episode, you are going to have to really justify that to the fans and people watching. But before I get into how I felt about the rest of the series, I do want to touch on why this choice was chosen in the first place. Bryan Lee O'Malley and his co-producer have been doing a lot of interviews since the release of the anime. And in those interviews, they speak a lot about their process, the people they've worked with, their experiences, and their overall feeling on the Scott Pilgrim pantheon. I'll be linking most of the articles in the description below. I think they're very telling and very interesting reads. But I think the most important piece to understanding why they went with this choice in the first place is the interview they did with Variety. In their interview, O'Malley and Grabinski talk about what led to the creation of the anime. O'Malley had been reached out to by Netflix all the way back in 2018. And while it was an exciting opportunity, O'Malley wasn't really feeling the idea of coming back to the series. He hadn't thought of any new concepts to write for Scott Pilgrim, saying, "I didn't want to do a straight retelling because that just feels like death to me." As time passes and the pandemic takes over the world, O'Malley is dealing with getting older, losing touch, and losing family members. The idea of bringing back Scott Pilgrim in any way just seemed to get further and further away from him. Until one night, him and Grabinski are grabbing a bite to eat. They're mulling over just small ideas of what could possibly happen if they were to come back to Scott Pilgrim. And Grabinski says something along the lines of, what if Scott loses to Matthew Patel and just dies? Pitching the idea as a complete joke, but from that moment, something sparked in Bryan's brain. It was the missing piece. Something completely different to throw the entire story off the rails, to make it feel new, refreshing, and different. With this very small change, anything can happen in his story now. The two felt like they had just captured lightning in a bottle again for Scott Pilgrim. Proverbially killing off Scott at the very beginning opens the doors for so many different opportunities for this story to take. And I gotta be honest, it really worked for me. I was not into the idea at first when I saw Scott seemingly die. I felt as though I didn't know this story anymore. But as the story continued, I fully understood why this choice was made. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is a meta-commentary on the entirety of Scott Pilgrim. It takes a deeper look at the themes, characters, and essence of this series in a brand new way, and I absolutely loved it. Removing Scott pushes Ramona to the forefront, allowing her to be the person who confronts all of the evil exes and all of the people in Scott's life. She has way more agency in the story than she's ever had. And as someone who has always had a hard time connecting with Ramona since she wasn't really allowed a lot to do in any of the previous iterations, this is exactly what I needed from her. She is now on a journey to find Scott while at the same time reconciling with other characters and growing as a character herself. That sense of shock and uneasiness and wonder of what could happen next was exactly what O'Malley wanted for this series. He wanted people to be the same type of surprise that they were when they initially read Scott Pilgrim for the first time. He wanted the story to feel more fun and feel more alive because you didn't know what was going to happen next, and he nailed it. And not only that, every character got the love they deserved. From the evil exes to the side characters to random new characters, this story explores so many things and fleshes out people that I really wanted more context for. Removing Scott opens up all of these different questions to be asked. What happens to these people if Scott doesn't fight them? How do they get closure? How do they grow as characters? How does Ramona deal with them now that they're not just punching bags for Scott? All of these characters are given so much more agency and personality than they ever got in their original context. My favorites being Lucas Lee, who got an amazing episode in episode 4, showing off his stuff, being extremely wacky, and getting some closure with his relationship with Ramona. Obviously, Ramona, our new main character, got so much to do in this story, getting a better understanding of herself, accepting her flaws as a person, and aspiring to do better with Scott. Kim, mainly just because I love Kim, like I love her. I really don't know what else to say. And of course, I think the standout character who got so much more love than she did in the original, being Knives. Episode 3 is my favorite. It is a perfect balance of action, emotion, music, and character growth. The overall episode is about Ramona and her ex Roxy coming to terms with each other. They get an amazing movie jumping fight scene, which I think is probably the best fight scene in the entire series. The most beautiful part, and the one that I had been hinting at since the very beginning of this video, was the jam session with Kim and Knives. Knives is a character that I think never got a proper character arc in the original story. It is considered probably one of the more tragic sections of the Scott Pilgrim comic. This version opts to give a different story for Knives to go on, to remove herself as just a piece of Scott's life and his mistakes, and give her a character arc for herself, a sense of growth and taking back her own identity. And that is all compounded with her jam session with Kim. It's nothing epic, it's not built up to, it's just a small moment of two characters just letting out their emotions through music, and it is so beautiful. These are the type of moments that just couldn't exist in any of the iterations of Scott Pilgrim. That is why this anime was made, to offer up these different perspectives and opportunities for creative and unique elements in this Scott Pilgrim world that can only be told through anime. But setting that aside for now, I fell in love with this story not just for the character moments, not just for the music, not just for the animation, not just for the colorful cast, but also the theme. What was this entire thing about? What was Scott Pilgrim Takes Off trying to say that the original couldn't? This is a story about facing your past and your future. The ending of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off sees Scott facing off with an older version of himself. The version from the original timeline. The one that defeated all of the exes, married Ramona, but then had a falling out with her later down the line. One that saw all of the things that he had done in the past that led to the pain that he's feeling from his separation from her as a complete mistake, and is trying to right those wrongs. This version of Scott never dealt with any of the personal problems that he had as an individual, ones that are very prevalent in the original story. This version of the story allows Scott and Ramona a chance to properly face the type of people that they are, the bad things that they've done, the people that they've hurt, and how those flaws could affect their relationship in the future. Running away from yourself and blaming others for your faults is not the answer. That is what Ramona has to face in this new iteration. And for Scott, it just shows growing up doesn't always make you wise. Just because you're older doesn't mean that all of those personal issues and character flaws that you have just go away. If you don't face yourself, there's no way for you to really grow. And this anime properly encapsulates that through the battle between Scott and older Scott. And I think it's something that people who are extremely young and those who are getting older can really empathize with. On the topic of Scott, this is something that I've always felt with, and I feel like some people struggle to reconcile. Scott is not a good guy. Scott does bad things, like date 17-year-olds. He's very selfish, very narrow-sighted, and does whatever he wants. And those aren't good qualities. Those are things that he needs to fix. He gets in his own way. And that's not just a me thing. Many people have talked about this, and even the creators noticed it. In an interview being quoted saying, "A lot of people like to say Scott Pilgrim's the bad guy of his own story, or he's the worst character, or he's the eighth evil ex." And that's a totally valid interpretation. That's definitely present in the original material, and it's fun to lean into that in a comedic and pathos-driven way. Older Scott is that eighth evil ex version of himself, the original Scott, and now this much younger version of him can see the mistakes that were made, and is given a new perspective on how he needs to grow if he wants his relationship with Ramona and everyone to work out the way that he wants them to. In the very same interview, the creators are quoted saying, "I think having empathy for people doing dumb stuff in their 20s is a bit more surprising and also satisfying, because you can look back at your 20s when you're older and feel nothing but embarrassment, which is really how most people do feel, and I do feel. But I think if you could find some little bit of grace and just try to cut them a little slack, it's a really good counterbalance to all the sarcasm and weird energy. Understanding that your youth is the time where you are going to make those cringy, unacceptable mistakes and do things that may not make sense to you when you're older is a part of that growth." And that's something that I have been dealing with a lot as of recently too. I'm 26 now. I'm not the same person I was when I graduated high school, went to college, dated people who I thought were the love of my life, eventually ended up getting my heart broken, working from job to job, moving from place to place. Life really has a way of teaching you the important moments when you're at your lowest. When it's all said and done, you do get to look back and cringe a little bit, but that journey is what made you who you are, and that's okay. And I think Scott Pilgrim Takes Off does an amazing job at illustrating that very same feeling. This is a different type of coming of age story, and those just tend to be my favorites. So I really, really loved it. After defeating older Scott and Ramona reconciling with her older self, these two characters now have the ability to look towards their future with a little more information, a little more experience, and a new perspective, coming to terms with who they are and trying to be the best version of themselves. This is the kind of storytelling that I really, really mess with. And what surprises me is that for some reason, the Scott Pilgrim Takes Off anime does a better job at being Fooly Cooly than any of the newer Fooly Cooly seasons. Will I elaborate on that? Not at this moment. As the curtain closes on this love letter to Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, I just want to finally say I am extremely grateful for Bryan Lee O'Malley for creating this world. He created a world and characters that seemingly outgrew him, for better or for worse. Through the commercial success of the comics, the commercial failure of the movies, which eventually became a cult classic, and the never-ending Twitter debates on whether or not Scott is a bad person or not, O'Malley has been quoted saying that all of this feels very overwhelming, and it feels like something he can just never escape. But the creation of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off allows for a refreshing take on his old series, allowing him to regain some of that control that the audience has taken from him over the years, and hopefully has opened new doors for him down the road. Thank you, Bryan, for coming back to the series and retelling it the way you did. I am forever grateful for all the hard work you've put out throughout the years, and I absolutely love Scott Pilgrim. But that's going to be all from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments how you guys felt about the anime. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.